Many of us want to make choices that go lighter on the planet, but it can be hard to find the time to get information to make good decisions. And sometimes when you get that information, it can be pretty confusing and the best choice isn't always obvious. I do a lot of sustainability related training in my daily work, and I'm often faced with a lot of everyday questions about these environmental choices. What's best, paper or plastic, glass or aluminum? Should I take a flight or is it better to take the train? So, what I thought I would do in today's session is to talk about some of these climate conundrums that we face in our everyday life and hopefully provide a bit of guidance on better choices that you might make or may even already be making, and how you can scale up the positive impact that you can have in your workplace. So there's three key things to keep in mind about climate change. The first is the obvious one, that the planet is warming. It's warmed by about 1.1 degrees centigrade since the pre-industrial period, so since 1850. The second point is that humans are causing it through the burning of fossil fuels like oil and gas, and through the destruction of natural carbon sinks like peatlands and forests. The third thing to keep in mind, and this is the most important thing if you remember nothing else, is that we absolutely can fix it. So solutions exist, we just need to act on them very quickly and in a cooperative global way. Now, for most organizations, many businesses are tackling climate change through something called net zero, or a net zero approach. And what net zero means is essentially working towards reducing emissions to zero, typically by 2050. And many organizations have also adopted an interim target to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. Now, this is what's in keeping with the Paris Agreement on climate change, which encourages us to do everything that we can to keep global warming within 2 degrees centigrade. Now, progress is being made. There are commitments that have been adopted. There are actions that different organizations are taking. You and I are doing things in our personal life to curb our footprints. But the current commitments are not currently quite enough to keep us within that 2-degree threshold. Right now, we're on a trajectory of about 2.4 to 3.6 degrees by the end of the century. So there's still work to do. And it's important work because every tenth of a degree matters in terms of protecting human health and ensuring our future well-being and the future well-being of others. So every step that I take, that you take, that others take, whether it's in our personal life or whether it's in the workplace, can really make a difference. This is actually a really great way to make a difference, and it can actually just be as simple as always remembering to ask, whenever you spend your money, is there a sustainable choice for that? Now, sometimes the choices can get a little bit technical, so I find that, at least in my own purchasing, it can help to keep a few simple but important guidelines in mind when it comes to purchasing. So for me, I'm working on two things in my life, my work purchases right now. The first is I'm trying to ditch plastic wherever possible. And the second thing that I'm trying to do is to find businesses that I can support that do social good in my own community. So on the plastic side of things, what that means is I'm really trying to focus in on those nasty plastics. So plastics like vinyl or food packaging or polystyrene packaging, those foam packaging materials that you get. And one permanent change that I've been able to make recently is finding a program that reuses takeout containers whenever I order food into the office or into my home. So that's been a really great switch to be able to make. On the social good side of things, I buy gifts occasionally for people, my clients, or sometimes I might need them for an event that I'm helping to organize. One of the local social enterprises that I've found is a group that provides these delicious food gift baskets. They're very, very yummy. And they are made by women who have newly arrived to Canada with their families and are looking to start up new businesses. So it's a really great way to provide a thoughtful gift to others that, again, also does good in my own community by supporting businesses of that nature. Now, I think the other thing to remember when you're using your purchases to help the planet is that oftentimes you're not going to find what you want, or someone might say, no, I don't have a sustainable option or a sustainable alternative. But it's really important to not lose heart in those situations, because asking the question really matters, even when you get told no, because it sends a signal to the supplier that you want something different, and that helps to make it more likely that you're going to find the solutions that you need next time around. This is actually probably the most common question that I get when doing sustainability trainings. So I think it's because it's one of those things that we all agonize over whenever we go for a cup of coffee, or maybe we go out for dinner, or we're grabbing a grab and go lunch or something like that. So it's absolutely true, first of all, that it takes more resources to make a reusable item than a disposable item. And the helpful way to think about this question is actually to focus in on something called the break-even point. So how many times do we need to reuse the glass until its overall impact becomes less than an equal number of disposable cups? So we can look at an example. Let's consider the example of a ceramic coffee cup. Reusing a ceramic coffee cup becomes better than disposables, provided that you can reuse that cup 56 times. So 56 is the break-even point for a reusable ceramic cup. And it's different for cold cups. So if you're ordering a drink at poolside and maybe they hand you an acrylic glass or a heavy-duty durable plastic glass, the break-even point for that type of material is actually as little as 10 reuses. For glassware, it's typically 15. And for a stainless steel cup, so a tumbler or a thermal glass, it's 24 times. Now, if you consider that in a typical kitchen, serviceware might be used as many as 2,500 times, which is typical for a commercial kitchen, it's easy to see that reuse always wins. Well, the first thing to keep in mind is making sure that you serve tasty, delicious food that people are going to eat so that there's no waste, because acting on food waste also acts on climate change. But if you are also want to focus on reducing the carbon impact of specific foods, the rule of thumb to keep in mind is that it matters much more to pay attention to what you're eating rather than where your food is coming from. And the reason for that is that typically for most of the food we eat, less than 10% of the carbon impact of it comes from transportation. There's one major exception to that rule, and that is where we're dealing with air freighted food. So a good example might be fresh fish from international destinations, always typically flown in order to be consumed, or out of season soft perishable fruit if you're getting something like raspberries from overseas, for example. So you definitely want to avoid those types of air freighted food. But in terms of the question of, should I eat or should I serve this or that, a few rules of thumb to keep in mind. One is that chicken and pork, if you're having to serve meat, is always a better alternative than beef or lamb. Plants are always going to be best. Okay, so always try to focus in on a plant-based menu where it's possible. Shellfish can be a little bit more confusing. There are some seafood options, shellfish options, bivalves in particular, that are quite low carbon, but there are also some very high carbon alternatives when it comes to seafood, particularly if it's air freighted seafood like I mentioned earlier, so be careful around that one. But as an example, we can look at, let's say, a situation where you're serving a beef and vegetable stir fry on rice, and you look at, as an alternative, a roasted chicken dish with a side of potatoes and some leafy greens. The carbon impact of that vegetable and beef stir fry is actually 9 times greater than the chicken alternative. And if you make that choice on behalf of 100 guests at a dinner, the difference can be as much as 1 ton of carbon. So opting for the chicken actually allows you to have the benefit of planting about 12 trees. That's what the equivalent benefit is. So it's a good thing to do to serve the lighter meat if you're at a meat eating audience, but I really encourage people to experiment more with plant-based menus. People are very receptive to it, not just for reasons of the climate, but for reasons of their health as well. And we are seeing a major shift towards plant-based. So if you can do it, make it a priority. There is a calculator that the BBC has provided online. So if you're interested in exploring the different carbon footprints of foods, you can check that out. So shipping is actually a fairly straightforward one because the rule of thumb to keep in mind is plan ahead and send by ground. It all really boils down to that. And to sort of give an illustration as to why, let's imagine that you're sending a parcel from London to Barcelona. The impact of shipping that parcel by air is actually 25 times greater than if you're able to ship it by ground. So always planning ahead and showing a preference for ground transportation is the climate-friendly choice to make there. There's actually an online tool that you can refer to at ecotransit.org that will help you compare the carbon impact of shipping different things by different methods. So if you'd like to learn more, you can check that out. So this question is actually one that's quite near and dear to my heart because a large part of my work during the pandemic has involved researching and trying to understand the carbon impact of the shift to more online meetings. So what I can tell you is that, well, let's take an example. The carbon cost of a 6-hour event for 4,000 people is roughly equal to the carbon impact of one person taking one transatlantic flight. So while online meetings definitely have an environmental impact, it's typically dramatically less than an event or a meeting where travel is a prerequisite. So we can actually look at the session that we're sharing today. So let's say we have 100 folks who are tuning in for these 30 minutes on their laptops at home or their desktop at home. The carbon impact of all of us being together today and watching this live experience is roughly equal to the carbon impact of a cup of coffee for yourself and a couple of your favorite colleagues from the office. So that's to say not very much at all whatsoever, and certainly dramatically less than a flight. So if it's possible to meet virtually and still achieve the outcomes that you're looking for from an event or from a meeting, it's always better to do that. It always goes kinder on the planet. And if you're interested in calculating the carbon footprint of your own online meetings, there's actually a free tool out there called the Digital Event Carbon Calculator that you can check out and do your own calculations and see how they are better for the planet, using a lot of really fun and interesting metaphors. So I hope you'll check it out. Yeah, a lot of the advice that I might share on this one are probably things that people are doing already. Some of them are pretty common sense, but just in case not, I'll share a few tips because where you can set up the office to be more energy efficient with your IT equipment, it really helps you save power in your sleep once you've done it. So it makes it really convenient. And it also often helps save money in the office environment. So that's really important these days when our energy costs are increasingly escalating. But a few things to consider is, first of all, enabling energy savings mode on all of your devices, whether it's your copier or your handheld device in battery save mode or the energy efficiency setting on your laptop or your desktop. Something else to check out in the settings is reducing your monitor brightness. That's often happens by default when you enable the energy savings mode, but you can also reduce it further, and that just helps avoid that bright white light that can increase the amount of energy that your devices use. Sometimes there's also settings in the software itself or in apps where you can enable what's called dark mode, which is that setting that allows the display to be white text on a dark background instead of dark text on a light background. And again, that just helps reduce your energy use in a software specific way. So you can check your settings in your Microsoft programs or your app programs to see if that option's available for you. A lot of web browsers enable that these days. Another thing to just keep in mind is if you can power down that device overnight, it helps reduce phantom power draws as it's sitting idle. I know while we're working from home, that can be a challenge. I know I tend to keep my computers on probably longer than I would in the office because I'm not physically going home. I might be coming back and doing a little bit of work in the evening. But if you can power down completely, it absolutely helps, bearing in mind that you may need to keep devices on for security backups and things like that. One of the things you can consider, and it's actually just sort of a helpful home tip for your appliances too, is getting a smart strip for anything that you plug in. What smart strips do is they detect when a device goes into an idle mode, and then it automatically cuts the power so that those appliances or those devices aren't drawing power when they're not in use. And those simple kinds of things can actually help you curb your energy use by about 23 to 25%. So where you can do them, it does make a difference. And don't forget too, I'll just add this as a last point, is that taking time to replace your devices matters. So when you do buy a new device, really keep in mind how long you're planning to keep that device. Keep it for as long as possible. Think about things like, can it be repaired? Is there a warranty that enables that? And when you do ultimately let it go, if it's still useful, consider donating it to an organization in your community that might refurbish computers or mobile devices for use by others. And ultimately, of course, when you do discard that item, making sure that it's discarded through a responsible recycler is really a good thing to do as well. Travel can be a tough one. I find it's tough because we're often making choices on behalf of other people who may not be always willing to take the lower carbon choice. So that's a bit of a challenge. But the rules of thumb here, where it's possible, train, coaches, battery electric, ground transportation are always better modes to gravitate towards where possible. So just to put that in context, it's actually possible to travel 167,000 kilometers on Eurostar rail before you emit a ton of carbon. And if you compare that to a short haul flight, which burns about 1 ton of carbon in under 7,000 kilometers, it's easy to see that train is the more climate conscious choice. In fact, taking the train is about 24 times more carbon efficient than taking a short haul flight. So if it's possible, it always pays to go that route. I'll be the first to admit, though, that taking the train is not always an attractive process. Where I live, first of all, they don't go all the places I want to go or I have to go. They're slower, schedules aren't convenient, but the upshot is that they are typically cheaper, which is a nice perk. So I'm trying to commit to do it as an alternative where the option is in place for me. One of the things that I've found has made it more of a palatable option is that I've started rewarding myself afterwards. If the train option is less convenient and less desirable, well, I'm going to be maybe more likely to book myself a spa visit or have a massage or maybe upgrade my hotel room while I'm in the destination, just to sort of give myself a bit of a pat on the back for making that lower carbon choice. So maybe you might consider providing those kinds of incentives if you're booking trips for someone who might be a little bit reluctant to take the train. When you do have to book flights, a couple of tips to keep in mind is that if you're using flight search tools like Google Flights or Kayak or Skyscanner or Light Flights, there is a setting in the search function where you can filter for flights based on carbon impact. And while it's true that yes, Air travel is the highest emitting form of travel per person. What we actually find is that using some of these flight search tools can help you reduce the average carbon impact of a flight by about 22%. So if you can option them to search for lower emitting itineraries, it certainly makes an impact. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're booking ground transportation is that more and more rental or an airport transfer companies are able to provide low or zero emitting vehicles, so battery, electric, and hybrid options. So this is a perfect chance to practice that habit we talked about earlier, which is ask for the more sustainable choice. Being able to pick a battery electric option helps you to reduce emissions by about 77% compared to a petrol or a diesel powered vehicle. So if you can make the switch, it certainly has climate advantages. The other thing to be aware of when you're booking hotels as well is many accommodation search engines are starting to add a filter to recognize or sort by properties that have earned a green certification or a sustainability certification. So a hotel that has earned a LEED accreditation, for example, a green building accreditation. It's available through Google Hotels. I believe Expedia also has it as well. So it's just an easy way where you're having to book accommodations to make the information about the hotel's best practices in sustainability a lot more apparent and easier to option when you're making a booking. So carbon offsets are a tool that we have to be carbon neutral, which is another buzzword that folks might have heard before. Now, when we engage in offsetting, what we do is we estimate the carbon impact of an activity, like taking a flight. And then we pay an organization to reduce an equal amount of carbon emissions or impact somewhere else by planting trees, let's say. Sounds good, right? Offsets can do a lot of good in the world. They can help us to restore our carbon sinks. They can help us to invest in renewable energy and climate solutions. But they're also controversial. They're controversial because sometimes they can enable us to delay necessary carbon reductions. And many of the projects that are out there can be of poor quality, so it can be easy to be misled in terms of a project that might be greenwashing and may not even be generating reductions. So if you're in a position where you're having to purchase offsets, there's a few important questions that I encourage you to ask the project provider. First of all is, would the emissions reductions have resulted without your financial support? And if your financial support is essential to generating new reductions, it tends to be a higher quality project. Another thing to ask about is, will the offset continue to exist? Does it have permanence? What you want to make sure is that the carbon savings that your offset is generating are not going to be undone. And that can be challenging for something like a forestry offset, where that forest may be at risk of being impacted by a wildfire, let's say. Another thing to think about is, has the project been verified by someone? Has an auditor actually gone out and checked that the project is happening and that from a scientific perspective it is generating emissions reductions? So look for things like certifications and a verification. Another thing to think about is, have local communities been consulted when it comes to implementing that project? And again, this is quite important for forestry projects or nature-based restoration projects, where the input of Indigenous communities really matters, because we want to make sure that those communities are seeing those projects developed in a way that suits them and provides them with equal benefit. Another thing to think about is how long it actually takes to generate the emissions reductions through your offset. If we look at projects like peatland restoration, it can actually take quite a long time for emissions to be absorbed from the atmosphere through peatland restoration, decades in some cases. So asking about timelines is important, and if it's possible to have a shorter timeline for those emissions reductions, there are advantages to that, mainly because the longer emissions linger in the atmosphere, the more climate damage is caused. So it's important to try and absorb them or shift as quickly as possible. And then the last thing to think about is, are you the only owner of those offsets? You want to make sure that when you purchase your carbon credits or your carbon offsets, that they are yours and yours alone, and that they will not be resold. So making sure that your carbon offset provider retires them after they've been purchased is critical. So it can be a bit of a technical space. My advice to people whenever you're thinking about offsets is to be very, very cautious, to always have an honest conversation about whether or not there is a reduction that you can make first, and where you're in a position where those emissions can't be avoided and you want to support a good project. It's really critically important to ask some of these questions to make sure that you're not at risk of being misled.